So I propose to commence the council meeting unless there's any knowledge of any connection problems. There being 29 people present, and I'd like to welcome Mike Ramsey, our Chair of the Audit Committee. So good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of Midlothian Council. A copy of the virtual meeting protocol has been previously circulated, and I would draw your attention to the following. Members are aware that they should mute their microphones and only activate when invited to speak. Once you finish speaking, please remember to once again mute your microphone. Members who wish to speak should do so by using the raise hand option and lower your hand once you speak. With regard to some of the reports on the agenda, it may be necessary to ask members to vote. Votes will be taken by way of a roll call. The minute will not include the roll call vote unless a member has been successful in moving a roll call vote in terms of standing orders. The public part of the meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the recording may be uploaded to the Council's website. Should the meeting last more than 2 hours, it's my intention to break around the 2-hour mark for 15 minutes, and if absolutely necessary, repeat this again after another 2 hours. There will also be a natural break as we go into the private session to allow you to rejoin using a different link that's been issued by Ross Neal, and we welcome Ross as I think his first time in sole charge of council meeting. Members will be aware that there were a large number of additional papers, so if at any point any of you want to just pause so that you can locate the PDF or the additional paper, please don't hesitate to ask the chair for assistance on that point. We have raised at the leaders meeting the undesirability of the level of late papers, and this is a subject of continuing discussions. The order of business is as predicted. There is additional paper regarding the railway services issues, which is technically outside this, but this has been circulated to you. Are there any declarations of interest now and at any time?
Provost, can I say that Marco's looking to come in? It may be that somebody's having connection issues.
Marco? Marco has his hand up. Thank you.
Chair, Councillor Johnson's also indicated she wishes to speak.
Yes, I know we need to read apologies as well. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. It was an order of business item number 2 that I wanted also to say that I feel that it is unfair to be asking us to make decisions on all these late papers. The volume of late papers was enormous, and there was no time to get briefings from officers. Feel like we are being held to ransom, that we are put before us papers that we're not prepared for. And I think it is fair to say that we should, all those to follow papers should be continued to the next meeting.
Okay, I'll ask the Chief Executive to comment on that, assuming that the connection problem is no longer with us. Perhaps Kevin Anderson could respond. The items are the minute volume, the External Auditor's Annual Report, the Social Work Report, the National Care Service Seminar Feedback, and there's a private item as well, which was late. Kevin Anderson.
Yes, Provost, thank you, and my apologies, my profuse apologies to members. Certainly it's not our intention to disrespect members or the due governance process here. Certainly we've had difficulty in getting a range of papers out, and certainly in time, rather than drip feed papers as they became available over the past week, I took the decision to put those out as one pack to supplement the original issue of the agenda. So I apologise for the inconvenience and trouble that's caused. But as I say, it was in order that we could provide the substantive papers to you in one pack, that being, as you said, the EY annual report, the Chief Social Work Officer's report, which was dependent on additional information being available and provided to her. The National Care Service seminar, clearly I couldn't issue that out until we'd held the seminar in order to provide the report, and the supplementary to the ScotRail timetables, which in itself is not an actual formal report. It's proposed draft for members' consideration, whether they want to use that or indeed not, and make their own submission or indeed not. So again, apologies for the current circumstances.
Councillor Johnson, does that satisfy you, or do you want to raise a motion on this matter? And we could perhaps also ask Kevin Anderson what the implications would be if any of these things were carried forward. I presume we can at least look at the minutes.
I don't think an apology is sufficient in this case, because the volume of paperwork is enormous, and to get through, just even to read it all was as a lengthy process, to digest it, understand it, anticipate unintended consequences, etc., and then not be able to ask officers to give us an independent briefing on the paper they've written is totally unacceptable. So yeah, I do propose that we continue these until the next meeting. Okay,
is there a seconder for that motion? And I'm well aware we need to
I'll second that, Provost.
Okay, would Kevin Anderson like to respond before we go any further?
Thank you, Provost. In terms of your standing question about the impact on business, certainly the annual auditor's report can be deferred to November, as indeed the external auditors are not available to us till then. They hadn't anticipated we'd be able to bring it forward given the conclusion of Audit Committee's business on that matter. The Chief Social Work Officer's report, again, can be continued without any direct implication on business. The National Care Service seminar will impact in terms of the timescales. Appreciate there's an extended timescale to November now for a response from Council, but it's clearly in terms of following through the recommendation for the working group for members to be participating in, and availability of that. So I'm in your hands in respect of how you want to continue that matter. And similarly, the ScotRail timetables, we've already had an extension which we've negotiated with ScotRail for a submission by end of business today, given the public consultation closed on Friday past. So in that instance, we either make a submission today or we're not able to make a submission at all. Thank you.
Okay, can I suggest to the proposers of the motion that we review the minutes but we accept the deferrals that have been proposed. And in terms of the National Care Service seminar feedback, we don't consider that, but we simply nominate the 6 members to join the panel. Would that be acceptable to the movers?
Could we hear what Councillor Hackett has to say first?
Okay, Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, councillors. I am concerned about the time sensitivity around the rail timetable and the National Care Service, because we do have to get a response in for those. I don't know how other members feel, if some of them are just reports, so you know, I'm happy to, I'd be comfortable with delaying those, but certainly the railway and the National Care Service one, I would hope we could progress those today.
Councillor Johnson, a proposal from Councillor Hackett.
I think that's acceptable under the circumstances. We have had an opportunity with officers to speak about the National Care Service, and we've had a seminar, and obviously our group has had its own discussions, so I'm agreeable to that one going forward. And given that the deadline's been extended as a courtesy by ScotRail, possibly we should consider that one too. Thank you. Okay.
So the ones that are dropping out are 8.1, the auditor's report, 8.4, the social work report, but we are going to consider the care service feedback, and we are going to consider the rail issues. There's also the private report, which of course we can't name.
Yeah, well, that's I think we can decide that in the actual meeting, because again, that's a very lengthy stuff, and when we tried to get independent information about that, it was quite difficult. And then it was also a blow to know that this report has been lying around for almost a year, and we hadn't even had a squeak about it. So that was really disappointing. The date on that paper is November 2020.
So item 9.1, which we can't name because it's private, you want that to be deferred as well, or do you want to hear it?
I think we actually need to hear it, but maybe even after hearing it, I might consider deferring it, because there's a lot of information there that we couldn't substantiate, and we weren't able to get an officer's briefing on it. So I think we'll need to discuss that actually in the meeting on why we should defer. Thank you.
So the compromise is that we will not be hearing 8.1, the auditor's report 8.4, the social work, but we will be hearing the rest, but with the opportunity, if we feel unsure, to defer for a further discussion at a subsequent council meeting. Is that compromise agreed by one and all? Alan Turpey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that Councillor Cassidy, as seconder of the motion, will need to give his express consent to the amendment conceded by Councillor Johnson.
I'm sure we'd hear from Councillor Cassidy if that were not the case. Councillor Cassidy.
Given.
Okay. Fine. We now have an
Chair,
order of business that works. Can we now go back to
Provost
from your head? Yeah.
Sorry, can I just raise an issue here? What do we consider to be too late for a paper to be submitted late to council? Because papers are submitted late at several meetings and accepted as such in the past. Where are we drawing the line here? This is quite unprecedented to say that papers aren't going to be taken today because they weren't circulated in enough time. What's enough time? You know, are we making a rule that if it's after a certain date, they will not be accepted in any circumstances?
With respect, Councillor Muirhead, it wasn't just the late tabling of the papers, it was the volume of the papers. So it was the two things combined. If it had just been one paper that was late, it probably would have been fine, but the volume was far too much. I think we need at least the 7 days to consider it. The administration have had far longer and are aware of more happening in the council than the rest of the councils. I think it's only fair that we're given the full 7 days to consider the papers.
And we make this question to the Standing Orders Working Party, because I agree with Councillor Muirhead that it's not very satisfactory to have an ad hoc decision like this, which could have implications for future meetings.
I think if we refer to standing orders, it does say 7 days.
We had a similar issue with the Audit Committee. So it's clearly proper for the council not to hear papers that are sent under the 7 day rule.
Provost, I think it's something that we need to discuss.
Yes.
Some other meeting. Yeah.
Can I ask Mr. Turvey to put it on that long list of issues for the Standing Orders Working Party?
Happy to do so, Provost, and at the risk of exceeding my usual interference, just to clarify, I think Councillor Johnson correctly refers to the 7 day rule within standing orders, but that's the 7 days is the aspirational, and I think standing orders actually say it's if possible within more than 7 days, but in any event 5 clear days before the meeting. So I suppose it's a 7 and 5 day rule, just to cause confusion.
Okay, we now have an order of business, but I should have remembered that we need to have apologies. Could I ask Ross to give the apologies, and then Councillor Muirhead would like to comment?
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, we've got apologies from Mrs. Morton, Mr. Bourne, and Councillor Munro. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Muirhead.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I'd like to submit Councillor Milligan's apologies for the meeting today, and could I perhaps draw Council's attention to the reason for Councillor Milligan's absence. The council leader was admitted to hospital on the 16th September after feeling unwell. Since then, he's gone through major heart surgery and will be following the instructions of medical professionals to recuperate for a period of 8 to 12 weeks and will return to duty when he's fully recovered. I did speak to Derek yesterday, and I'm pleased to say that the procedure which took place last Monday has gone well, and in fact he's now out of hospital. So that is good news, and we look forward to Derek being back at work as soon as he is well enough to return. I'm sure, Provost, that the council would want to send him our best wishes for a speedy recovery. Thank you.
Absolutely the case, and we look forward to seeing him when he's ready to face the council again, and send him our best wishes for a very speedy recovery, insofar as that's possible, considering the extent of the surgery that's been involved. We then move on to consider the minutes volume, 18-page minute volume. Are there any issues arising from the minutes? There being none, the minutes are adopted. Could I have a proposer to adopt the minutes? Proposer. Russell Emery, and a seconder. John Hackett, thank you very much. We then move to motion 7.1, the SNP group motion on pages 7 and 8. Can I ask Councillor Debbie McCall to talk to this motion?
Thank you, Provost, and good morning. I'm putting forward this motion as I'm sure all councillors will have received an increase in the reporting of antisocial behaviour in their wards. We cannot underestimate how this impacts on our residents. To feel unsafe in your own home is completely awful, and having been there, I absolutely empathise with our residents who are coming forward with issues on a daily basis. I'm a great believer in prevention measures to ensure that antisocial behaviour does not escalate and cause misery. I therefore move that Council bring a paper to next Council in order to examine the measures to robustly challenge, address and prevent antisocial behaviour in our community. It's also imperative that Police Scotland are involved as one of our main partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Cassidy to second.
Thank you, Chair. And could I just say that in the 4+ years I've been a councillor, this is one of the most welcome motions I've heard coming forward to council. Every one of us as elected members, as Debbie has said, knows only too well the impact of antisocial behaviour in our communities. And it's fair to say that I have pensioners and families who are living in fear in my own ward, who need protection. If we're not there to protect the people, who is? We need to work in conjunction with Police Scotland to bring some kind of order back into these communities. And it's probably one of the most common complaints I've received as a councillor from people in my ward. So today we say to the culprits, you have a choice, behave or you'll pay the consequence for your behaviour. Chair, I not only second this motion, I applaud it and Councillor McCall for bringing it to council and forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Provost, sorry. Yeah, happy to support this motion. I mean, we're absolutely committed to tackling antisocial behaviour, and clearly that's evidenced when we reintroduced the funded officers, the community action teams, 14 extra police officers for Midlothian, who do work jointly with the council and key partners to tackle antisocial behaviour. Yeah, so happy to support the motion.
Thank you very much. Further contributions? I recall we have had motions before about the neighbour problem, and I hope this one is able to attract the support of the House. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much. I've been contacted by an external, I don't know if they're a partner just now or not, but Mrs. Lorraine Gillis from the Scottish Community Safety Network's been in touch with me and asked if she can be included in discussions with council officers and police going forward. It's a very notable charity that works very well in this field, and it comes highly recommended by many people. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Curran.
Yeah, no issue with that at all.
Fine. Just to be slightly pedantic about this motion and the next motion, it talks about the council will report to the council. I presume we just mean the officers of the council will report to the council. Do we have further contributions? There being none, is there anyone contra this motion? We look forward to find out more about what options we have and what resources we can bring to try and tackle the problem of antisocial behaviour, especially in neighbour situations. Item 7.2. SNP group motion. Councillor Kelly Parry.
Thanks, Provost. This week, 1/3 of households in Scotland receiving universal credit will have their income slashed by 20%. The average household reduction will be 12%, and some households will see the amount of universal credit they're entitled to reduced to absolutely nothing. Around 480,000 people in Scotland are set to have their support cut by £20 per week. And the number of households in Scotland affected by the benefit cap has also increased from 6,100 to 6,800, with an average amount cap per month equaling £218. And these numbers demonstrate the absolutely devastating impact that the callous Tory plans to cut universal credit will have, as thousands of families across Scotland are due to have their income slashed with one stroke of the Chancellor's pen. The decision to cut universal credit is morally indefensible. It's going to push thousands of people into poverty. It's going to leave many parents unable to feed their children here in Midlothian. In fact, the plans has led to the unusual move of all the First Ministers of all the devolved nations joining together to urge the Prime Minister to reverse the cut. And I think that demonstrates the gravity and seriousness of the situation that we face, and why I've brought this motion forward today. As well as the universal credit cut, there is the threat of rising energy prices and food bills, the imminent national insurance hike, which will push the impact on a single working parent of 2 children to £1,750 a year, according to analysis by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And with the impacts of the end of furlough start to be felt, this is a perfect storm for both our residents and the likely demands to council services, which are yet unknown. But what we do know is that many low-income families will have to make the unthinkable decision of whether to heat their homes or feed their children this winter. How is this levelling up? So we must do whatever we can to support our residents in need, and I move this motion today with the hope that all councillors will rally round our families in need and make clear the support that Midlothian residents need. Thank you, Provost. Happy to move.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Debbie McCall.
Thank you, Provost. Happy to formally second Councillor Parry's motion. Really sad that this is something that we have to bring forward. It's not the first time I've spoken about universal credit in this council, and I doubt it will be the last. And I think maybe we just need to reflect again on those numbers. 7,297 of our families in Midlothian, that's how many people are going to be affected with a £1,000 a year cut. I'd also note that unusually, Ruth Davidson, Baroness Davidson of London Links, and six previous Conservative Secretary of States for the Department of Work and Pensions have spoken out about this. I think that's quite unprecedented. Having been a welfare rights advisor in the past, I thought things were bad in 2011 when these things were brought in. But this, as it says in the motion, is an absolute perfect storm, and I'm really concerned about what's going to happen this winter. Members will know that I'm involved in a volunteer group that's helping people out in Midlothian, and perhaps I should have said that at the beginning. And we're already seeing the issues that this is causing, and I really fear this winter. And I'll pause there, but just happy to formally say thank you, Provost.
Thank you. First hand up is Councillor Winchester.
Thank you, Provost. It's true many residents could face a cost of living crisis, and that this motion is correct. It's going to be a difficult time for a number of people. However, by putting their perfect storm down to Brexit just isn't true. I'm sure they're aware of the pandemic that the world has been facing, or whether that's passed them by. Millions of pounds in furlough payments, as well as the temporary uplift in universal credit, has been given to Scotland via the UK government because of the pandemic, not Brexit. The fact that the uplift to universal credit was called temporary may well give the game away, but it was temporary, which, although originally was for a year, was extended. It's now coming to an end, and that's what temporary means. If the Scottish Government was so concerned about the effects of withdrawing the uplift, they do have the powers to continue the payment. I'm surprised at the mention of tax hikes in the motion, considering income tax is devolved to the SNP Scottish Government, and Scotland is already the highest taxed area of the United Kingdom. What the SNP forget, and of course won't admit, is that they could have had complete control over universal credit by now, but gave it back to the Conservative UK government as they couldn't manage it themselves. One final point. The SNP group have asked that the council brings a report back to the next council, and following on from the Provost's comments there, just wondering what that means. I'm presuming that it means that they're asking for council officers to write a report and bring it and present it to the next full council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Winchester. I've had a chat message which indicates the public are having difficulty seeing the process of the meeting. Marco, are you aware of any way we can remedy that?
Provost, we have had technical difficulties. Those are, I think, are now remedied. And apologies to everyone who was trying to listen in, but we were getting horrendous issues with the sound.
Thank you for that. I'll proceed for the time being. Councillor Johnston. Thank
you very much. It's not just all the stuff that's been mentioned in this report that's a concern to me and many others. We've also got serious rise in fuel costs and food costs, and we're all really worried about the possible or imminent rise in winter ailments that's going to have a big effect on businesses as well. So I think all these things coming together at the one time as a terrible cliff edge. We're all running to like lemons falling over the cliff edge, and who's going to be there picking up the pieces? Because I think Westminster expect charities to be doing that, but the people who provide to the charities are just the ordinary folk who live next door to us and over the road. They're all struggling as well, so charities are not going to be able to fill the gap. So we really need to have a robust system in place from the council working with the government, and if the government's not going to support the people, I think it will be a terrible tragedy.
Thank you for that. Councillor Alexander.
Good morning. I support everything that has been said about this already by the SNP group and the motion brought by Councillor Parry and Councillor McCall. I would add that the promise to pensioners has also been broken on 2 points. To the women who have now got to work until they're 66, and men now also having to work till they're 66. So all the papers that are put forward as 65 as the year of old age is no longer the case. It's 66. And with the promise being broken of keeping the triple lock, even if it is just temporary, it's going to cause absolute misery to pensioners who also have to face increased fuel and food prices. And I would say that for children, we're experiencing in Midlothian an increase in child poverty. Child poverty doesn't just affect today, it affects their whole future, their health. We see in Glasgow that all the historic heart complaints, etc., hasn't just been a recent thing, it's generational, that poverty carries on, that the ill health of one generation carries on into the next. And we see that in Glasgow. And I think this has to be addressed as an urgent matter.
Thank you again. And Councillor Leigh Douglas.
Thank you, Provost. The facts are the UK government have spent significant amounts of money to tackle the virus and support households and income in Scotland. at the same time as tax revenues across the UK were falling due to less economic activity. Instead of writing to the UK government, we should be writing to the First Minister to ensure when funding packages are being made available, including winter fuel funding, that these are fairly distributed to local authorities, particularly in this case Midlothian with the highest growing population, and ensure it is allocated for the intended purpose of supporting families in need in Midlothian. The SNP seem to want to blame others and Brexit for everything, and I understand the concerns over the pressure of inflation, but this is not about Brexit. This is actually felt globally across Europe and Asia. What will happen with Brexit is a higher wage growth here in the UK, which we're already experiencing, meaning more people will be better paid instead of cheap labour. A positive take would be to ensure the council work with local businesses to help the people in Midlothian access the opportunities of employment and receive the benefit of training schemes. It might come as a surprise, but many people want to support themselves, so let's help them do that. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Provost. I mean, Scotland shouldn't have to go cap in hand to anybody begging for their own money back again. With full control of fiscal, economic and monetary policy, it would give Scotland the ability to bring in important reforms free from a dead hand, a waste monster. Once again, the Scottish Government have been asked to find funds for the block grant to mitigate damage done to our poorest from decisions made by the English Government.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. I see possibly some legacy hands. Councillor Alexander. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. I've deliberately waited because sadly I sort of expected this to end up in a sort of constitutional debate when the matter of the topic is really quite serious, poverty that many of our families face here in Midlothian. I might suggest as an amendment to try and get some consensus here that we write to both the UK and Scottish government. Each tier, us as a local council, our Scottish government and our UK government all have a responsibility to support families. We have different roles and responsibilities, and we can't allow this topic to degenerate into a constitutional debate, in my view. So if I may, Provost, I don't know how we would sort of get this minuted, but if I could add to the third paragraph that this council would also write to the Scottish Government, and that any report back just highlights what responsibilities each tier of government have in terms of supporting families, particularly around addressing poverty. I'd just also add, Provost, ultimately to tackle poverty, it's education, work and trade. Education is the way to improve work and employment opportunities, and then the ability to trade, as history has shown, is lifted a general population countries, but also individual families. It gives them the opportunity to engage in economic activity, which will be vital as the country comes out from both the pandemic and the effects of Brexit. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that amendment?
I'll formally second that, Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Muirhead. Ross, have you enough information there to construe the amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Provost. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there are a few more contributions still coming. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a few points Councillor Winchester had asked about the last part of the motion, just to make clear. Yes, the motion is to bring a report back to the next council to examine the impacts on Midlothian residents, but also examine the demand to council services. I think we've already talked in this meeting and other meetings about the anticipated demand for homelessness, welfare rights services, etc., etc. To touch on Councillor Hackett's point, maybe had the best aim in the first place was to stay quiet. That probably would have been preferable to what he said, because I actually found it very insulting that both Councillor Hackett and the points that Councillor Douglas made was you just basically told people to get themselves a better job.
Ray Douglas.
And I think, Lee Douglas, I think that's very insulting. And actually, I saw a Tory council leader on the news saying something the other day, and I think that that's unfortunate that that's what you said.
Conservative.
But I don't. Sorry, Provost, could you call the meeting to order and let me say what I'm going to say?
Do call the meeting to order. Please, could we not have interruptions while councillors are speaking?
Thank you, Provost. And so I won't be accepting Councillor Hackett's amendment into this motion. And it's not because that's a constitutional reason. The motion was written in a way that was meant to be amenable to all councillors, actually, but particularly to Labour councillors. And if Councillor Hackett was paying attention, he would have noticed that some of the wording for the motion had come from the Labour backbench motion in the UK Parliament. So it's unfortunate that you don't see the benefit of that. There's a clear process in terms of how the budget setting will take place for the Council, the UK Government and the Scottish Government, and the timeline as well set out and in place. And that is why I had asked for a letter to be written to the UK Government, which I thought was perfectly within order and wouldn't be a problem for my Labour colleagues. So I'm very disappointed and I'm happy to end there, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair, Provost. I just picking up on something Councillor Hackett said about education. Everyone sitting in this meeting today knows that children going to school hungry cannot be educated properly. £20 per week is a massive amount of money to some of these people that are on these benefits. Last night on STV, Catherine Sampson challenged the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, with a £20 note and said you couldn't even buy a cocktail in London for this £20 note. These families can't buy breakfast for their children. And for Pauline Winchester, Councillor Winchester, to sit and say you can't blame Brexit on everything, I'm blaming Brexit on everything because the standard of living in this country is going to go rock bottom. We've got a shortage of drivers, we've got a shortage of food coming, we've got a shortage of fuel. This is down to Brexit. So please don't sit there and patronise us, telling us it's nothing to do with Brexit. Get the £20 reinstated, Boris Johnson, because you're stealing out the mouth of our children.
Yeah, I'm conscious we've got a very long agenda today, and all of these issues are very profound. We already have a lot of activity in these amelioration programmes. So if contributions could be kept fairly quick so that we can actually get around to making a decision on how we proceed. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. I just object to having my words twisted in the way that I've been by Councillor Parry. I've not once said that people need to just go out and get a better job. I made the statement that education lifts people out of poverty. We've got an excellent track record in this county of improving education, and I think we should continue that. Each tier of government has a responsibility. That's my point. I do not detract from the intention of writing to the government. I understand the impacts of Brexit. I understand the impact of removing the £20 temporary uplift. I get that, and I support the intention of that motion. I'm just saying that the Scottish Government and ourselves as a council also have a role to play. So I completely object to Councillor Parry's comments and the attempt to twist my words. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we want some sort of fresh ideas out of this exercise. So let's try and get to a position where we can actually formulate a motion. Councillor Leigh Douglas.
Yeah, sorry, I'll keep this really short, but I also am quite offended by Councillor Parry's comments. I did not say for people to go out and get a job. What I did say was that many people want to support themselves, and there are opportunities out there. So let's help them do that. So I take great offence to that, quite honest. And SNP have a real issue with twisting people's words, and I think they knew what this motion would do. Quite honest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, all the parties want to ameliorate the conditions of life, and it's a question of how you get there. Councillor Mackenzie. Yeah, Stuart, you win a prize for being the first on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost. I would like to say that regardless of why we are where we are where we are. And we know that 40% of people who are already on universal credits are already working. So there is a train coming down the track. I would just ask all councillors, can we just focus on what it is that we want to do to help improve this situation, just as you were saying there, Provost. So if we could all get behind this motion and find a way forward, I think the people of Midlothian, who are our bosses, remember, would thank us for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd now like to proceed, if necessary, to a roll call. Given that there is an amendment, I propose to take the amendment first and then the substantive motion. Ross, could you, I see Debbie McCall wanting to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. May I propose a roll call vote, please? Yeah, a formal roll call vote, thank you.
Is there a seconder for a formal roll call vote, so our names are recorded? A seconder for that? Councillor Wallace. Ross, a formal roll call vote, if you could call out the names of the councillors, I think in alphabetical order.
Yeah, thank you, Provost.
On the amendments.
Sorry, before we move to the formal recall, just, Chair, I appreciate my pedantry increases with almost every meeting, but there is a step to go through before the formal recall, before the formal roll call vote. It must be approved by 1/3 of the members present.
So we need a vote on the actual holding of the formal roll call vote as per standing orders. Let's proceed to do that. So we're asking each councillor, do you want to have a formal roll call vote?
Yep, would you like me to proceed with that, Provost?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll be doing that in alphabetical order. So, Councillor Alexander, you would like to have the vote?
Yes.
Councillor Cassidy?
Yes.
Councillor Curran, are you on mute?
Councillor Curran, yes.
Councillor Hackett?
Yes.
Yep. Councillor Hardy?
Yes.
Councillor Imrie?
Yes.
Councillor Johnston?
Did you say Councillor Johnston?
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Leigh Douglas?
Yes.
Councillor McCall?
Yes.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Aye.
Councillor Muirhead?
Yes.
Councillor Parry?
Yep.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Smale?
Yes.
Councillor Wallace?
Yes.
And Councillor Winchester?
Yes.
So that's all councillors present are happy to proceed to a vote. Provost.
Thanks. We now go through the same process again. We're starting with the amendment, so it's whether you're in favour of Councillor Hackett's amendment that we should write not just to the Westminster Government but also to the Scottish Government.
Okay, again, I'll do that in alphabetical order. So if you're for the amendment or against, Councillor Alexander?
Against.
Okay. Councillor Cassidy?
Against.
Councillor Curran?
For the amendment.
Councillor Hackett?
I'm really disappointed, but yeah, for the amendment. I can't believe we're getting to this. Thank you.
Councillor Hardy?
I mean, I'm equally disappointed, like Councillor Hackett. And I think compromise is important, and the issues of poverty are important. So for the amendment.
Thank you.
Councillor Imrie?
Sorry, Provost, amendment.
Sorry, Councillor Imrie, is that for the amendment?
Yes, sorry, for the amendment.
Councillor Johnston?
For the motion.
Councillor Johnston, we're doing the amendment first.
Oh, terribly sorry. Against the amendment.
Councillor Lee Douglas.
For the amendment.
Councillor McCall.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Against, thank you.
Councillor Muirhead.
For the amendment.
Councillor Parry.
Against the amendment.
Councillor Russell.
For the amendment.
Councillor Smail.
For the amendment.
Councillor Wallace.
Against the amendment.
And Councillor Winchester.
For the amendment.
So Provost, we've got 9 councillors for the amendment and 7 councillors against.
So the amendment is now incorporated in the body of the motion.
Excuse me, Provost, can we have that count again? How many councillors are in the chamber?
I can only see the number of persons. Ross, would you like to review that?
There's 16 councillors currently in the chamber or present at the meeting. So there's 9 for the amendment and there is 7 against.
Thank you. So the amendment is now incorporated in the substantive motion. Do we wish a vote on this? Does anyone want to vote, or do we simply accept that the motion as amended has been carried? There being no objectors, I presume, Mr. Turpie, that's competent for me to proceed with the meeting.
I'm happy that that accurately reflects the decision of the meeting, Provost.
Thank you. We now move on to item 8.1. No, we're not moving on to 8.1. The Ernst & Young report is being carried forward, but we do have 8.2, the Audit Committee Annual Report. The Chair is in attendance. Who would like to speak to this?
Thank you, Provost. It's Mike Ramsey, the Independent Chair. And as it turns out, this is probably my last opportunity to present an Audit Committee report to the full Council before the change in Council next May and change in officers. The report highlights the activity that the Council has, the Audit Committee has done to assure the Council of the governance standards adopted and maintained by the Midlothian Council during the year. I won't go through the full details and the list of all the various reports that we have considered, but I'd like to draw members' attention to the fact that each year we do a self-assessment of our effectiveness, and this is highlighted on page 10 of 72 under item 4.3 of the report. There are a couple of points there which bear consideration and which we suggest might be worthy of incorporation in future years. One of the items that is a running assessment that we have as the Audit Committee is that we rely to ensure that the governance of the Council is suitably stringent on the activity of other committees and subcommittees of the Council, because we rely on committees such as the Business Transformation and Performance Review and Scrutiny Committees, providing an element of the governance monitoring. So the activity of other committees is paramount to our committee's effectiveness. We are also, during the course of our discussions on our self-assessment, considering the structure of the Audit Committee. As a small council with only 18 elected members, Midlothian Council does not have the numbers of elected members to fully comply with the SIPFA suggestion that members of Cabinet are not part of the Audit Committee in order to provide some independence. The independent members of the committee, myself and Mr. De Vink, are recruited to provide some balance to that. And during the year, and indeed during the 4 years I've been in place, we haven't had an issue. However, good governance suggests that this be considered. And one of our recommendations from our report is that the standing orders and scheme of arrangements proposed committee that is working on reviewing this in preparation for the new council coming into effect should consider how the audit committee be made up, or recommending to the new council when that is elected in May. The other element that caused some discussion is the suggestion that the independent members might work on a 5-year term, but on a slightly different cycle to elected members to enable some continuity from one committee to the next. It's clearly conceivable that the full committee of elected members could be replaced by a completely new committee post-May if existing members are not re-elected or are not recommended to be put to the committee. And so the expertise that's built up in one committee is lost when the next set of elections come around. And one mitigation for that we were considering is whether it would be appropriate to recruit an independent members in between the council elected term in order to provide some carryover. But I think the main item which has come out of discussions, you've unfortunately not read the EY report or formally considered the EY report prior to this, otherwise I would have been able to refer to it. But when you do consider that, you'll see that they also suggest monitoring and control issues should be given some consideration. The audit committee, when we started, we decided to set up an action log so that decisions and requests for reports to the audit committee were tracked to ensure they were delivered on a timely basis. And this action log is reviewed each meeting. In our discussions, we thought that, and this goes back to the effectiveness of other committees, this might be a practice that other committees could consider bringing into place to ensure that they can track that the work that they're doing and they are requesting is being delivered and controlled. An old adage is that what gets measured gets done, and an action log is a way of measuring what gets done. I'm happy to take any questions. There's no further issues that I'd like to make or to recommend. I'd like to thank all the officers over the 4 years that I've been in place for their assistance and their support, and also all the members of the audit committee for their support. We will continue our work obviously to the end of term, but thank you all for your support and assistance.
Thank you, and can I add my compliments to you as chair of this very important committee. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I just wanted to put on record my thanks to you for all the work that you've done over the past few years as a member of the Audit Committee. You've been a really helpful chair to me, so thank you very much for that. I just wanted to pick up a couple of points that you made, excuse me, and it might be more for some of the legally minded officers, but just your point about not having members of the administration on audit committee. And I appreciate actually how in the last administration, when it was predominantly two parties that were quite equally split, that was more of an issue. But I wonder if now that there's kind of three parties in Midlothian Council and that they're a bit more essentially there's more opposition councillors than there is administration councillors, and so I wondered if perhaps next time that should be changed, and whether it would be easier to be changed than in the last administration. And another point I wanted to bring up is just when you're talking about how Audit Committee relies so much on the scrutiny through other committee systems as well. A point that I had raised in the last Audit Committee and at the last PRS was the lack of action logs in the council, which does exist in Audit Committee. It's very good practice of how a good council committee should be run. But I know in this council chamber, I have raised various issues over the years that have just disappeared into the ether, and even very recent things like we've been promised reports on participatory budgeting, about speed change she's proposed for Midlothian, online access to period products, extra money for rape crisis centre services, and we're told that papers will come back and they never do. So I just wondered if there's something formal that we can move from council today, and I'm sure there shouldn't be any disagreement about that from councillors, but it would be good to get legal's opinion on the first point and council's general feeling on the second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parry, and I certainly endorse the concept of discussing the action log for the council itself. I think that's important for us. I wonder if that could be added again to the Standing Order Working Group. Also, we had from Mike Ramsey the concept that we need a member of the Audit Committee who can straddle between elections, and that would possibly mean we would have 3 at one point. I just wonder if we could also discuss how that might be implemented in the Standing Orders Working Party. Councillor Cassidy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with everything Kelly's just brought forward there. And I'd also like to put on record my thanks to the independent members of the Audit Committee for the time that they give up to come and sit as volunteers to do the best for Midlothian. So thank you. And Mike, for your diligence in chairing these meetings, it's much appreciated.
Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Provost. I had the pleasure of joining Audit Committee for the first time through this term of council, acting as substitute for council leader. It's regrettable that we're not able to consider the paper that was meant to come before this, because it does note in the EY report that on the balance of, I can't remember the exact wording, but they're saying there's enough checks and balances in the system that didn't raise any alarm bells for members of the administration being on the Audit Committee. But as a general premise, I think we'd all agree we shouldn't have people marking their own homework. But we do have PRS and other, as I say, checks and balances within the system. So I would ask that if that is being considered by the Standing Orders Group, that the recommendations there from EY are also considered. And equally with the action log, I agree. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And rather than trying to cobble something together today, if we could perhaps refer that back to that group. And whilst we don't have the action log to follow that up, if we can all remember that, we can discuss that hopefully at a paper that comes back to the council. But I'd just also like to thank Mike as well for your role as independent chair. I think it was news to me, if I'm honest, after I was elected, that there was an independent chair, independent member. But I want to thank you for what is an enormous job and your efforts in carrying out that role. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just ask, is he volunteering for a 6th year? Are you edging for another year, Mike?
Through you, Provost. No. I wasn't intending to go beyond the end of the council term. Councillor Parry made a question, and better legal minds than me can answer it definitively about the SIPFA recommendations for not having cabinet in the Audit Committee. It's worked fine. I mean, it hasn't been an issue, so it's not a comment that I make in criticising the way that it has operated. And we have 6 members of the elected members of the Audit Committee, 2 Labour, 2 Conservative, and 2 SNP. So it's well balanced. The only problem is that then means you have to have an unelected chair making a casting vote if votes split on party lines, which it has done once. But no, the recommendation is to avoid having cabinet members in. But yes, the comment that you make, Councillor Hackett, is recommendation 3 from Ernst & Young. I'll read it to you. It says, in our view, the role of independent members on the committee, together with the benefit brought to the committee as a result of wider roles and experience of the 2 cabinet members, has outweighed any risk impacting the independence of the committee. So I think, as I say, it's not a criticism. There isn't a finding or anything like that. It's just a suggestion that the Standing Orders Committee that is looking into these things, it's topical to raise it just now, as consider how that potential shortfall and shortcoming, and it depends on what the results of the election and how the votes split in the constitution of the next council. But consider how that might be addressed if we have a similar level split. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The paper is marked for decision. I think the decision is that we accept this report, but pass on the various topics onto the Standing Orders Working Party, and I'm sure Mr. Turpey has noted those down. Can I thank you again, and can we move on to item 8.3? Again, a report for decision, and Joan Trinent is going to introduce the statutory plan for the delivery of learning and development in our communities. This is a regular report.
Okay, thank you, Provost. This is a statutory duty placed on local authorities to provide and coordinate community learning and development activity with partners. A plan is required to be produced every 3 years and approved by a local authority before submission to Education Scotland. A comprehensive community learning and development plan has been produced with partners and endorsed by Midlothian Community Planning Partnership. The plan covers a range of activities, including community capacity building, adult learning, literacy, numeracy, ESOL and youth work. Over 500 local people, community groups, staff and volunteers have responded to the consultation, with further work planned to engage more views from young people as the plan progresses. The plan also needs to ensure that staff and volunteers are supported through appropriate training and development opportunities, and focuses on the following 6 themes: COVID-19 recovery and engagement, social interaction, health, wellbeing and poverty, pathways to learning, personal development and employment, digital and resilient communities of the future, climate change and outdoor space, and enhancing our workforce and volunteer skills. Councillor asked to approve the plan and agree to its submission to Education Scotland. Happy to take any questions, Provost.
Thank you for that brevity of really an enormous area of activity with many important appendices. Councillor Muirhead.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. It's no question as such, but you know, this plan's clearly important as we're coming out of the pandemic, and the changes to the way that we work that the pandemic's affected. Active learning for our citizens of all ages will be important as the rapid change in the way we work, particularly in the way technology has been introduced more rapidly than we ever expected, and that's the way the world is at the moment and will be into the future. So giving people the opportunity to identify their own individual and collective goals, to engage in learning and take action to bring about change for themselves and their communities is absolutely vital going forward. And I think it's not just about work, it's about equipping people with the skills to interact in different ways as we move forward, and to use the kind of systems that all of us will be introducing, you know, to communicate together. So I therefore recommend this plan to the Council for approval and for submission to Education Scotland as detailed in the recommendations. Provost, thank you.
Thank you. That's the recommendations on page 21 of 94. Can I see a seconder? Councillor Hackett.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. I'll second the recommendation that we submit this report. If I may, one of probably the most moving experiences I've had as a councillor was attending with the Deputy Provost a graduation ceremony of adult learners, and hearing people, adults with disabilities who had engaged with education for the first time. It was maybe in a period when they were younger, and we didn't approach education in a way that we would today, so they were excluded from education as children. And then as much older adults, engaging in learning for the first time, formal learning for the first time, and what it did for you know, social contact and the sense of self-worth, etc., was quite extraordinary. And more practical, there's quite a number of young mothers who were coming back, you know, so maybe left school at 14, 15, 16, coming back to learning as in their mid-30s, and linking it to some of the debate we were having earlier about that opportunity then for people to take up employment opportunities, improve their life opportunities. It's really, really important. For that, I recommend that we submit this to the government. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think our congratulations to Joan Trinent for the work of her department, which is much appreciated. There being none contra, I take it that is now adopted, and thank you very much for your contribution. We are not looking at 8.4, the late report, but we are looking at 8.5, National Care Service Seminar feedback. We're also looking, as you know, for not just the party leaders to be part of the delegate group, the cross-party group. We're also looking for sectorally related volunteers from the councillor group. Joan Trinent.
Okay, thank you, Provost. Again, not to take up people's time, and apologies for the lateness of this. It's obviously a moving feast. I think it was important that, as officers, we gathered as much information as possible before we could present, which was unfortunately not until the 29th of September. So we had the seminar on the 29th for those who could attend, and we now have dates in the diary to meet with every single group in relation to answering any questions in relation to the National Care Service consultation. So the recommendation is that Council delegate to a cross-party group of members comprising of leaders and portfolio holders to sign off the final response prior to submission to the Scottish Government by the 2nd of November. So it was just to look at these names and to take any questions, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the staff who've given us advice and provided the seminar with the presentation, and then for coming again to speak to the SNP group. I just want to reiterate that we should remember that this is a consultation. It's not a bill or legislative proceedings, and they haven't started yet, and the Scottish Government is looking for guidance on the best way forward and to proceed so we can enhance care for all the citizens and residents. However, the SNP group do not wish to accept this recommendation for a cross-party working group response to the consultation, and we will complete our own consultation response before the deadline of the 2nd of November. Thank you.
You're, of course, free citizens in this matter. Could I just ask Alan Turpey if there are any consequences for the whole concept if we only have two parties involved in collaborating? Does the concept of the committee fail because one of the parties is not involved in it?
Chair, the requirement, I suppose, the council have been invited to submit a response to the consultation. Now that, in theory, could go down to your casting vote on every single answer to the consultation. It would still be the council's agreed response in that matter. So if the SNP group do not wish to take part in it, that would not prevent the council's response being in and the SNP group submitting a separate response on their own behalf to it.
So we have a cross-party group of 4 in that case. Councillor Hackett.
I'll submit to Councillor Muirhead if I may, Provost. Thank you.
So Muirhead.
Yeah, Provost, I think that, Councillor Johnston's response there is very disappointing. I have to say that over the last few years on this council, given the makeup of the council and the fairly even split of councillors between 3 parties, I think we've actually done pretty well in terms of being able to work together, whether it's on agreeing a budget, on the education cross-party working group. I think there's huge benefits came out of that. I think that if we are unable to submit something here that is cross-party, and I realise that there would probably need to be some kind of compromises and getting to something that we could all agree with. But I think that would be a valuable thing if we were able, as a council, to come together. I think it would make a much stronger representation on this issue if we were able to do it jointly as a council. I realise that we could all submit, and indeed, even if we put something forward as a council, it doesn't stop an individual group from submitting something themselves. But I just think that we're losing an opportunity here to put something forward that's a collective thing that would have more weight than if we were doing it as individual groups.
Yeah, there are further contributions, but can I first ask Councillor Johnson, is she amenable to reconsidering her position? I think I know what the answer will be.
No, we're quite content to do our own independent one together in time for the deadline.
Councillor Winchester.
I'd just like to add my disappointment to Councillor Muirhead's there. I really thought this was a way forward for the council, and it just shows that all the working together over the last 4 years that we've managed, with a few hiccups, but we've all managed it, is now being thrown down the drain by the SNP group.
Thank you for that comment. Councillor Hackett.
Yes, I'm disappointed. It's, we've submitted a lot of responses to the Scottish Government on behalf of the council where we have put forward a unanimously agreed response. I knew I would have to compromise some of my views in reaching a consensus that we could have all a paper that we could have agreed on, but I was quite prepared to do that because I felt it was important as part of this process that this local authority submitted something with unanimous support. So I do regret that that is the case, and if need be, perhaps we do just have to go by majority. Thank you.
Okay, so we're left with the perhaps unsatisfactory situation. Councillor Muirhead, Councillor Imrie first, sorry. Councillor Imrie.
Thanks very much, Provost. Just a little bit confused, but that's nothing new. COSLA, of which the 32 local authorities participate, have discussed this as a collective and are looking to go forward as a collective. Now, I'm a bit surprised that the SNP group in Midlothian see that they can't participate. I genuinely cannot for the life of me understand why one group within the council wouldn't sit down with the other two groups to discuss a council response to a consultation. As Councillor Muirhead's already said, all three groups will still have the opportunity out with the council from a political perspective to have their feelings known with regard to the consultation. And, again, it's just trying to urge the group to rethink their position. It doesn't do any harm in sitting down with others and discussing to try and get a common line that will come back to the council. So, I'm just sorry, Provost, I'm really disappointed. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we're heading towards having a majority report with the two parties and then a minority report from the SNP in effect, not perhaps in nomenclature. Councillor Muirhead.
Yeah, Provost, can I just pick up on something that Councillor Winchester said there? And I appreciate she was supporting the point that I was making, and I thank her for that. But what she said there about, the cooperation that we've had over the last wee while and throwing it down the drain, I think it's important that we didn't lose sight of what we've achieved so far, and that we didn't get to a situation where we're all falling out. We've still got quite a considerable period of the council to go, and I think working together is still important. I don't think that an example like this, important though it might be, needs to mean that we're not going to be working together for the benefit of our constituents between now and May.
Councillor Winchester.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Muirhead. I totally agree with you.
Thank you. We are where we are. I presume from the discussion we can proceed to have the nominations, so that also the two leaders, or Councillor Muirhead deputising for Councillor Milligan. Are there any nominations from the Labour group?
Could I move Councillor Hackett?
Councillor Hackett, and then from the Conservative group.
Can I propose Pauline Winchester, please, Provost?
Thank you. So we have a team of four. therefore, I think that is where the recommendation stands. And as far as I can see, we now have concluded that item and can move on to the Housing and Services Assurance Statement 8.6 at page 29.
Thank you, Provost. This report seeks approval to have the respective Cabinet member authorise the Council's annual assurance statement to the Scottish Housing Regulator that Midlothian Council is meeting its legislative and required regulatory standards as a responsible landlord of social rented housing. There is an explicit requirement for members to be cited on the range of information that's been provided in this report, and the appendix details the evidence for assurance that the Council meets its regulatory standards. And members will have been cited through the year in changes to the allocation policy, tenant participation and engagement, our house building programme, the local housing strategy and the strategic housing investment programme, and most latterly the rapid rehousing transition plans outcomes. Following submission and consideration, the Scottish Housing Regulator will determine an engagement plan with the Council, although we can report that there are no issues or concerns to be reported to the Regulator, as there have been operational updates provided throughout the course of the COVID pandemic to them. Provost, Council is recommended to approve Councillor Curran to sign off the statement as the Cabinet member concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the statement on page 35. Can I ask Councillor Curran to comment?
Thank you, Provost. Kevin's probably covered most of what I was going to say, but the insurance statement's in place to ensure that landlords are responsible and accountable for delivering positive outcomes for our tenants and service users, and that includes homelessness and tenant and resident safety. And Midlothian being the largest landlord in Midlothian are certainly not exempt from that. We need to be scrutinised as well. The statement reaffirms our commitment to all of our service users, and we intend to fulfil at all levels. We recognise the importance of complying with all the necessary regulations and the standards to ensure compliance is met. We have robust and effective processes and mechanisms in place. We continually review, monitor and update these processes on an ongoing basis so that we can best support our tenants and deliver excellent housing services. And despite the impact of COVID over the last 18 months, there were no issues highlighted to the Scottish Housing Regulator, and pleased to note that there are no breaches of the unsuitable accommodation order either. Provost, I'm obviously required to do an action here, so I'm unable to move or recommend that.
Thank you. We can have a seconder for the signing of the assurance statement. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I'm quite happy to propose these recommendations, Provost, but first of all, can I ask exactly what evidence other than the statement in this report was provided to Councillor Curran, and could he possibly demonstrate that to the Chamber?
Yeah, it's evidenced in the appendix. I'm only working off one screen today, so it's going to be difficult to access that, and I'll just defer to Mr. Anderson.
Kevin Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. Certainly a specific briefing has been provided to Councillor Curran on this very matter, and as I've outlined in terms of my comments, the whole range of evidence is available and has been presented to this Chamber over the past year, and is readily available should any councillor require any element of that compilation to be provided to them. We certainly have a whole range of policies and strategies which ensures that we're meeting our equality standard, also in terms of the outcomes of our allocation policy, and indeed our homelessness returns, which are oversight of the Scottish Government in addition to the Housing Regulator. So we have a robust and compliant regulatory and framework which is evidence to both the Regulator, the Scottish Government, and available to any member where we need to evidence that directly. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe we compare broadly very well with other Scottish local authorities. Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost. I was just looking to second Councillor Johnson, provided Councillor Johnson had been happy with response from Councillor Curran and Kevin Anderson, which I think she was. So I'm very happy to second.
Thank you. Therefore, I think we are home and dry, and Councillor Curran can add his moniker to the document. Thank you very much indeed. We move on to 8.7 on page 45, Lothian Buses Review Update. Kevin.
Provost, my colleague, Mr. Oliver, is going to speak to this paper. Thank you.
Eric.
Morning, Council, Provost and Councillors. The paper before you is to provide an update on the progress made regarding development of options for reform of the City of Edinburgh Council's wholly and partly owned transport arm's length external organisations, as reported and approved at the CEC Transport and Environment Committee on the 19th of August 2021. With that paper appended to this report for background information and context. The preferred approach to implementation is summarised in section 3.2 of the report, with the reconstituted company being responsible for delivering all council-owned public transport modes in the city, rather than being responsible for bus alone. It would also be responsible for anticipating and developing new transport modes. Opportunities for growth of public transport within Edinburgh and the wider region should be identified and developed to support and enable policy delivery and for the commercial sustainability of the company. A new shareholder agreement will be required, with the role of the minority shareholders in the reconstituted company remaining, and we should continue to have a board presence, as is the current case. The shareholder agreement would make clear that the profits and losses from Edinburgh Trams would be excluded from dividend to the minority shareholders. Ensuring separate accounting for and continuity of the 9% shareholding in Lothian Buses by the 3 minority shareholders will require resolution. A mechanism to deliver this outcome will be considered with our partner councils. A detailed delivery plan and full risk assessment will be developed from the final decision on the preferred approach. It is recommended that Council notes the progress of reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Imrie.
Thanks very much, Provost. Just to endorse what Mr. Oliver has said there just now, we didn't, and not to use a pun, but we didn't start this journey from this place, and it's a thanks to all 3 Lothian authorities for the way that they did approach this, and indeed Lothian Buses as well, because Lothian Buses were actually looking very vulnerable at that time. Now, from our perspective, we have always said in this chamber that the important thing for us is to actually have a Lothian bus service that serves as much of our communities as we can possibly serve, and that is our raison d'etre all the time as far as this chamber is concerned. I'm quite pleased so far of where we've got to, but there's still a bit of work to do, Provost. We're still going to have to bottom out the kind of relationship that the 3 Lothian authorities have with Edinburgh regarding the board, etc., and how much impact we can have. I mean, it would be lovely to get full board membership, and that's a discussion and a debate that we will continue to have. But what we've got thus far is a long way better than where we started off, and I think we're on the right road to get something that benefits Midlothian and safeguards the good services that we get there, and can continue to add to these services as we take these steps along the way. I mean, for example, with the amount of housing that is being developed, yes, we need to have an increased service into our communities, and already we're in discussion with Lothian Buses, and perhaps that discussion will maybe have to be ramped up a little bit in order to get this going. But from my perspective, Provost, I think it's a very good report, and our thanks must go to the officers who have not always got engaged with Edinburgh, not through their fault, through Edinburgh's fault, where they didn't actually engage with us at the outset, and we had to look for that engagement. So happy to support the report that's in front of us, Provost. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, Derek, for the report. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I want to know is, what does this mean for Midlothian residents? I mean, Councillor Imrie talked about bus service in some of our towns, but I just wanted to draw attention again to the fact that Auchendirnie hasn't got a bus service at all whatsoever, which is absolutely appalling for people that live in Auchendirnie. And I think particularly now, and there's other areas in Midlothian as well where the service hasn't went back to what we were at pre-pandemic level, and I appreciate some of the reasons for that. But at the same time, I also appreciate that there is women in Auchendirnie that now feel like they can't go out at night because it means that they have to, you know, walk that road back themselves, particularly at a time when, you know, people are very aware of those issues. So what does it mean for people that live in Auchendirnie? Will this be a good thing? Can we finally get a bus service back into Auchendirnie? Is that a conversation that you're having with Midlothian buses? And if not, is it something that we can press in the absolute strongest possible terms? Because this has went on absolutely far too long, and it would be good to know if there's been any progress made at all.
Thanks, Councillor Parry. I'm happy to have those conversations with Lothian buses going forward. In terms of the impact of this reform for Midlothian, it is couched very much in the terms of it is multimodal, it is promoting active travel, sustainable travel, green travel, and trying to encourage people off the cars network and more onto public transport. So aligning public transport with commuting in and out of the city and across Midlothian. How that affects Auchendirnie, I hear loud and clear from you, and I'm happy to take that conversation to Lothian buses on your behalf. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. I see that this report is, we just have to note it, and I wonder what that really means for Midlothian Council agreeing to another council's agreements or decisions. But I've also got some other questions, such as how much will the transition cost? Will services be affected? Are we really assured that the tram service will not jeopardise the bus service in Midlothian, given the tram history? I didn't think I'm the only councillor with questions on this, and I wonder what it all means for Midlothian residents travelling to and from Edinburgh during the transition and after the transition. The other thing is, whilst it might not be directly related to the next report or the seminar we're having later on this afternoon, but I think a seminar on how the transport network links work throughout Midlothian would be helpful for me, because quite often, and it's dreadful to say this, I take the car because it's too much a hassle working out where the connections are. Thank you.
That's a very fastball, Derek Oliver. Is there anything you can say other than taking these general themes forward in our discussions with Lothian buses?
Happy to take the themes forward. I'm delighted that this afternoon, I think, will help answer where we're trying to go to in terms of connecting our communities through the orbital bus route. However, yeah, as Provost says, happy to take these points to Lothian buses and or provide a briefing in terms of our strategic networks and local developments as they align to our housing growth and future development.
Thank you for that. Stuart Mackenzie, Councillor Mackenzie.
Excuse me, Provost, a few technical issues. Thanks very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Thanks very much for the paper, Derek. It's interesting reading. I'm just wondering, and perhaps you'll cover this over in the seminar later, is my understanding correct in that the new company is going to be responsible for multimodal public transport? And I suppose then my question goes to the investment decisions that Edinburgh Council might make. So if they want to increase, let's say, picking for example, cycle lanes, does that money effectively come out of the buses' income stream? So, I mean, the Lothian Buses is obviously a very well-run company, and it's a very reliable source of income. Would future investments come from that income stream? Do we know?
I was going to say, so it does not affect, this was one of the key areas of discussion in terms of the dividend and the impact on the minority shareholders in terms of the buses, is how that would then, so we wouldn't be subsidising Edinburgh's growth in the tram network, we wouldn't be subsidising Edinburgh's specific growth in other modal transport or sustainable links. So how they will financially separate those out so as not to affect the minority shareholders in the bus network. They said that that's what will come forward. It is something that we need to really test, given the fact that if you are encouraging multimodal transport, there will be an impact on bus patronage. So all that will need to come out in the further discussions.
Thanks, Derek.
Councillor, do you want to come back in, Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Provost. Sorry, I think I've got a bit of a delay on the line. No, good to know that you've got a handle on that, Derek, because of course, as the tram network increase, it needs to go down.
Stuart, I think we're having problems with your connection. For the time being, I'm going to pass on to Councillor Alexander and then come back to Councillor Mackenzie if the connection improves. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I welcome the orbital route, but what I also want to ensure is that that connects all people in Midlothian. So at the moment, just looking at my own part of Bonnyrigg, we see some services being withdrawn to go to other places, which and I think that needs to be re-looked at, and possibly if I can talk to you offline about that at some point. But I think that we look at all communities within Midlothian and make sure that they are all being served, because we do need to get rid of cars on the road and the pollution, etc., that it's causing. But at the moment, yes, I wouldn't take a bus anywhere that I need to know I need to be in a place at a certain time, because I just can't rely on that. I think it's also important that we join up the buses with the trains, etc., to make sure that people can make full use of all our transport connections.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Number of very running issues there. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. I'd like to second Councillor Parry's comments about the number, the bus that doesn't go through Auchendinny. I was going to say the number 15 bus, but the bus that no longer goes through Auchendinny, that they've not had for years. It is a huge concern for people there. And the concern also that I have is the number 15 bus, which used to run from Pennycook via the Bush into Morningside, Blintsfield, Toll Cross, has not been reinstated post-pandemic. That's a really important bus for people who are commuting from Pennycook into the Bush and also into Morningside. There's two hospitals there, Royal Edinburgh and Astley Ainsley, and we've got lots of people that work there whose bus has been taken away, forcing them into cars. Had an email from a resident, a 15-minute bus trip from Pennycook to the Bush, where she works, is now taking 2 hours in various buses, and it's just not working. I'm going to the theatre tomorrow, obviously going to have to take my car because there's no way other than I'm going to get, 5 different buses there. So I really think that the number 15 bus is a bus that we need reinstated to Pennycook as soon as is practically possible, please.
Thank you, and I think Derek's taken that on board as well. That concludes the comments. This is a report for noting, so we can move forward onto 8.8, the consultation on the new ScotRail timetables, which the deadline is 5 p.m. Could we have Kevin Anderson to talk to this?
Thank you, Provost. Sorry, I see Councillor Curran's to come in, Provost. I don't know
sorry,
if it's a preceding item.
Thanks, Provost. Just very quickly to pick up on my comment to Councillor Johnson from 8.6. It is in the appendix evidence, but it's not very legible. I do have it in an Excel spreadsheet format, and I'm happy to forward that on to Councillor Johnson.
Thank you
That
for
would
that.
be excellent. Thank you very much.
Back to trains and Kevin Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. This report advises members of the recent ScotRail public consultation of their proposed new timetables and the specific change detailed for the Borders rail line, where there have been cross-party concerns in the service levels and non-peak hours principally. Well, the public consultation closed on Friday, the 1st of October. ScotRail were contacted and have agreed to accept, by exception, a submission by close of business today from Midlothian Council if members wish to comment. And we circulated a prospective draft to all members to include the factors of growth, the Council's climate change declaration and transport emissions for any additions or amendments at Council today. Thank you.
Thank you. My sixpence worth on that is to contribute more detailed and granular information on those housing developments that are close to the existing stations such as Gorebridge and Redhook. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much. I've got quite a bit of concern. I mean, in the past we've been promised more than 2 carriages on the line. When there was a big football match on a couple of weeks ago, I went to get the train. I was the last person on. It didn't take passengers on from S Bank onwards. That was extremely disappointing, given that they should have anticipated that. They're still missing trains, etc. I read in the report as well that they're saying that 77% of the seats are empty for the distance travelled, but that doesn't seem to be happening any time I'm travelling on the trains, etc. And given that it's going down to an hourly service, it's really, really disappointing, especially for people in Midlothian South who rely on the Scottish Borders bus, which goes into Edinburgh, which is a 2-hourly service. So that means that folk in Midlothian South are not getting well served by public transport, which is really disappointing. And furthermore, when I was doing my surgeries in North Midlothian on Saturday, as I was coming out, the Borders bus flew past people waiting for a bus. So that meant they had 4 hours to wait for the next bus. Fortunately, I knew some of them, so they just jumped in my car and I dropped them off in Newton Grange. But that was like a bonus or a win-win for them because I passed by. But we can't have I'm just disappointed it's going to an hourly service and the Borders bus is a 2-hourly service and people in our area are not well served. I just wanted to draw that to your attention. I'm disappointed.
Thank you. As a connoisseur of the X95, I can endorse that comment. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, if the trains were more reliable to pick people up, and were at, regular, I think you would get more people actually using the trains. I don't use the trains because I cannot rely on them either stopping to pick me up or that they will arrive. So I think a more regular and a more reliable service would actually get more people on the trains. Sorry. And that is what we need.
Indeed. Subsidies. Councillor Johnson, still hand up. Is that a legacy hand? Thank you very much. Any other contributions? So, Kevin, in terms of the submission of this, what's the mechanics for the few hours that remain?
Provost, I see Councillor Imrie is looking to come in.
Councillor Imrie.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Provost. Totally endorse what Councillor Johnson and Councillor Alexander are saying, and that's the rub of the matter. If the services are cut, then you're actually going to push people away from the train service and not get them to use the train service. So happy to endorse the report as it is, but obviously because time constraints, we don't have the kind of benefit of having a real discussion on it. But just to recall that the opening of the Borders rail line was actually, if you go back even further than that, the campaign that we had within Midlothian and Scottish Borders and indeed Edinburgh to get the reinstatement, we predicated our local plan on having a rail line. And in actual fact, all the houses we see along that rail line wouldn't have been there necessarily if it hadn't been that we were going to be getting a Borders rail line or the Waverley rail line, whatever you wish to call it. So from my perspective, I cannot for the life of me understand, it's a fairly new service. It's still in its infancy in terms of usage and usages, and it actually is, in fact, serving growing populations. For example, Newton Grange has grown, Gore Bridge has grown, Shawfair will grow. I mean, the part of Shawfair hasn't actually maybe been as quick as the other two parts I'm talking about. We've got Reg Hughes that comes on, and a huge number of houses there as well. So if you want to try and encourage people back onto public transport, which, by the way, I think is a really, really difficult job, because people during the pandemic have been advised to use their own transport if they had to go out, I think we've got a huge task on our plates anyway. But to further discourage it by cutting services, I don't think is the right approach. So I think not only do we put a report back in to Network Rail, or ScotRail, should I say, we also get that report circulated to our two local MSPs, and also the regional list MSPs in the area, so they know our thoughts and what we think with regard to the future of the rail services in Midlothian. And I'm very disappointed that they're going to stop a lot of the trains at Edinburgh Waverley, because we argued long and hard to have it extended so it was actually going out towards the Gyle. Now, whether we agree or disagree, and that's a debate for another day, that people will go back to work, people that go to the Gyle to work will have that taken away, and it means making a change at Edinburgh Waverley. And as Councillor Alexander alluded to earlier on, if you have to make a change, what you then tend to do is say, oh, to hang with this, I'll take my private car. Now, if we're actually really, really serious about our climate change agenda, then, you know, the last thing we should be doing is cutting services. So I'm delighted that as a collective, we are going back, hopefully as a council, we are going back to ScotRail and putting our comments forward. But I also think we have to engage with our MSPs, and they have to realise the graveness of this cut on a very, very new train service that's come into being. So thanks very much indeed, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, and then Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. I'll keep this brief. It was just to say wholeheartedly agree with everything that Councillor Imrie has said there. I think that was a fantastic contribution. Thanks.
Russell certainly knows the transport world very well and has been a great asset to Cestran for many years. Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah, I would second that about Councillor Imrie's statement there. It is spot on. This smacks of people looking at a spreadsheet and saying, look, we've cut here. It's like running a business and saying, we're not busy between 11 and 1, let's just shut the shop. This is a service, it's vital, as Councillor Imrie pointed out, to all these new developments that have taken place in Midlothian, where people have moved out because of the promise of easy transport into Edinburgh. This is going to clog up our roads. We're going to have massive problem. And on the back of COP26 taking place in Glasgow, I think this is very ill-timed by the railway company.
Yeah, well, the railway company, of course, ultimately is funded through the Scottish Government, so they're kind of linked. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. In our local plan, we've got huge aspirations to develop our communities one way or another. We're hopeful in the Gore Bridge area, we get a new high school, etc., and lots of other, a supermarket, etc. So we need to keep attracting a viable population to come and settle here. How do we know that this reduction in the service by Scottish Rail won't impede or restrict our further development?
There's a question to Derek on the sort of chicken egg question. If we
I don't know, it's probably a question for a planner, but maybe Derek Oliver could answer it.
And we've got the enormous development plan for South Mayfield, which is in walking distance of Newton Grange Station as well. So these are all cogent points. I think Derek's taken all that on board, and Kevin too. Shall we move on? And thank you all for your contributions. We now move to 8.9, free school meals for P4 to P7 pupils, the capital requirement. Kevin Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. So this report's in respect of the Scottish Government's announcement in June of this year to extend free school meals provision from primary school levels P1 to P3 currently, with a staged rollout to include pupils in P4 through to P7. As is referenced in section 2 of this report, there is a good uptake of over 70% in the present P1 to P3 provision, and it's not anticipated that future demand will reduce. And while revenue funding has been provided from Scottish Government, capital costs to be incurred to increase our capacity and adhere to nutritional standards amounts to £323,650, as detailed in Appendix 1 in terms of the composition of that. Provost, whilst these are external efforts continuing in order to meet the capital costs, as we need to implement the logistics now, Council is recommended to note the report and approve the capital funding request. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, and we're obviously very grateful for the revenue funding from the Scottish Government, but unfortunately the sting in the tail is we need to raid our own capital reserves for this. Silence implies assent. Councillor Johnston.
Oh, no. Sorry, that's a boo-boo.
Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I would just like to ask about the capital expenditure. The staffing, manual workers, food nutritionalist, staff training, food costs, I can understand, loss of income and light equipment maintenance and heavy equipment, and some of the equipment that was being asked for. So do we not already have a food nutritionalist? And do we not already have the knives, forks, plates, fridges, cookers, etc.? Because I'm presuming that even although we don't supply the free school meals to the other pupils, we do offer the choice of paying for them. So I'm not sure why we need this extra expenditure.
Is this strict? I guess it is, but could you give us more detail? There's some issue with nutrition and Natasha's law, which is all about sensitivity. So perhaps the feeding of children is now becoming much more complicated.
Thanks. So yes, in terms of the nutritionalist, it is a role that we need to reinstate. We did have that post previously, and as you say, in terms of those allergen concerns and nutrition generally, with the delayed introduction, but they're now being introduced about nutritional standards disrupted by COVID as so much else. And certainly it's a skill set that we have a gap. And whilst we've been able to maintain those standards to date, clearly with this additional capacity request, both in terms of the service standards and the capital requirements, that's the purpose of bringing this forward today, in order that we can incorporate that additional capacity. Certainly we're expected to make a submission by the end of this week for the capital cost implications to Scottish Government. So this is really in the context of a forward funding request that's come to you today. And equally, we can expect some uptake moving from packed lunches to school dinners as a consequence of this. This is why we've got, again, that additional growth aspect incorporated here, which relates both to the staffing impact and the equipment in order to deliver and serve those accordingly. Yes, those facilities exist in some schools already, but not to the extent we anticipate, and some of those are now aged and require replacement too.
Thank you. Councillor Muirhead.
Oh.
Councillor Alexander wants to come back. I apologise. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, so this isn't a cause of the Scottish Government doing this wonderful thing of giving free school meals to all primary school children. It's actually a cost that we would incur anyway. And I just wondered about the food nutritionalist. Does that mean that we have been acting without a food nutritionalist in the past? And there have been concerns about allergens, etc., in the past as well. So yes, I'm just asking about all these questions.
So taking each of those points in turn, Councillor Alexander, there is additional ask here because there is additional provision in terms of the extra rollout across P4 through to P7 on a free school meal basis. Now, whilst there's some existing free school meal backs payments currently to that cohort, the fact that it would be any of the pupils who want to present across P4s to 7 is an additional ask, is an additional cost that we need to say plan and set out the logistics for now. So there'll be the prospect of additional sittings as well, because our school estate is not currently all set up given the restrictions and also the social distancing measures that are in place. And I know we're going into a post-COVID environment, but we still need to ensure the safeguarding both of the students and the staffing, teaching and non-teaching staff as well. This could also translate, I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but in terms of our capital programme for the Learning Estates strategy, where we may need to build in additional capacity to dining and catering facilities as well, because it won't be practical to have 2 sittings in certain school settings, potentially 2. So there's still unintended consequences that come from this. Some of it, you're right, is in terms of replacing existing equipment, but there is certainly additional capacity requirements as part of this ask before you today. In terms of the nutritionalist, we haven't had the level of a nutritionalist that we've had before. We've had that on a shared basis in the past. We've had a dedicated resource in the past. We've certainly got capable staff who've met those requirements. But as you say, in terms of the continuing development for allergies, as well as food hygiene, we are certainly bringing in that capacity to assist that team and be a more robust position than we've been previously.
Thank you. I was going to rule the word is in fact nutritionist. Councillor Muirhead.
Right.
Muted, Jim.
I'm not sure if Derek Oliver was trying to get in to clarify something, Provost.
Thanks, Councillor Muirhead, Provost. Just to pick up in terms of capacity and to provide assurance, our allergen management and food hygiene has been supplemented by environmental health officers working with the facilities team to provide that guidance and assurance of all things allergens. So it's just to provide assurance that we haven't been lax, or we haven't had any involvement from professionals in dealing with allergen management. However, we do need to have that resource specifically centred within facilities management to provide that ongoing management and control of allergens and food safety. Thank you.
Thank you, that helps. Councillor Muirhead.
Provost, this is an excellent initiative, which I'm sure we all support wholeheartedly. But it is another example of a worthwhile project being introduced by Scottish Government without a clear understanding of the cost of implementing it, and in particular, the pressure on councils like Midlothian, where we've got a rapidly growing population, which results in many of our schools operating at or close to capacity. And as Kevin Anderson mentioned, when we're building new schools, we have an additional capital requirement resulting from the requirement to provide this service. So in a lot of your schools, we don't have the infrastructure or space required to implement it without considerable capital expenditure. Now, I understand that Scottish Government are, and we will get capital from Scottish Government, but it's important that it's at the right level. And this has been discussed, this is issues that's been discussed at COSLA over the last few weeks, and with other councils actually indicating they're in a similar position to Midlothian, and indeed some indicating that they didn't understand how they're actually physically going to implement this. I think it's imperative that the Scottish Government provides adequate capital funding for the project and that accurately reflects the position of each individual local authority and that the capital allocation isn't distributed on the basis of some formula that does not reflect the different situations that exist in each area. And I think we need to make sure that we do all we can to make that point to Scottish Government. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you. I'm much in agreement with that stance. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Provost. And thank you for the paper, Kevin. I'm sure your team have put in a lot of work to this. It looks good. And I look forward to seeing the creative ways that you and your guys come up with in providing these meals moving forward. I think every councillor would agree that children with a meal at lunchtime stand a better chance of getting, a good education. So first thing is to say is thanks for that, Kevin. A few points just maybe for more clarity. On the second paragraph of the background on page 68, we say there'll be a staggered rollout of the programme. Now, is that staggered insofar as you mean that you're going to do all of primary 5 in every school in Midlothian, or is it staggered as in you'll be doing school A first, followed by school B, followed by school C?
In terms of clarity, Councillor Mackenzie, it's staggered in terms of its introduction on a year group basis. So it would be, yeah, it's across P5, yeah, P4, then P5, then P6 and 7 across the respective dates there from August 21 onwards.
And that'll be every school. That's perfect.
Yes.
Thanks. And then on page 69, the bottom paragraph, we talk about changes to the estate in terms of maybe doing 2 dining sittings, etc. Have we factored into the way of doing all sorry, I'll start that again. When we're building a new school, Kevin, are the dining facilities factored in on the basis of what we currently have, i.e. free school meals up P13, or are the dining facilities designed on the basis of basically giving every child a school lunch for new builds?
For the new builds, yes, we've had to revise that position to take account of this change in policy. So that we build in that capacity, which wasn't previously originally envisaged.
Wasn't there, and we have done that work.
We're doing that work for those that are on the drawing board, literally, yes.
Perfect, thank you. And then on the last page, on page 70, there's the risk of increased food prices and supply chains being increased. It's the second paragraph from the top, Kevin. Is that something that you would consider as perhaps suitable for the PRS contingency committee that we were discussing in the last 3 or 4 weeks?
I would anticipate clearly any of these pressures would be reported through the performance and scrutiny that Cabinet and indeed PRS carry out. So we'd be reporting those clearly on a quarterly basis, any impact or variation to service levels and performance.
Okay, thank you very much for that. No further questions, Provost.
Okay, we're obviously getting stuck into this topic. Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Provost. Again, I welcome this initiative from the Scottish Government. I think it's a win-win situation. It's going to create local jobs. And as people that have been involved in education have been telling us for years, that bairns that are well fed learn easier and better, and they're better behaved in the classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, Councillor Wallace, I completely agree, and I was just going to make a similar point as well, but it was well made, so I won't repeat it. On that topic, however, though, Kevin, you'll know that I'm really disappointed that we still haven't returned to school meal situations for our older children in schools, and I wondered if there had been any progress on that. It's been a few weeks since we discussed it, and I know that there was some initial plans to return to that setting after the October holidays. I wondered if there was any reassurance about that. And just in the paper, I noted there was a mention of loss of income, and I wondered if the situation that we're in at the moment, where we haven't got school meals for older pupils, is that costing the council money, or is that saving the council money? It is a question that I've put to the Director of Finance. However, I have yet to get a reply, so I just wanted to put that ask on the record as well.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Kevin Anderson, the implications for the older range of pupils.
Yep, thank you. And certainly at present, in terms of Councillor Parry's position for hot meals, we're certainly meeting after the October break with our education colleagues about the implementation of that and a phased reopening of dining halls, because certainly that was what we'd inferred at PRS. That planning was ongoing, and it is. Certainly there's been further guidance we anticipated coming out in that regard, but just to confirm that it'd be after the October break in this instance, and clearly taking account of capacity within dining halls, because current catering provisions happening within classrooms. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Provost, I didn't get an answer to my second question.
Apologies on the income point. I don't know the answer to that, Councillor Parry. I will take that away and come back to you personally on that one.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Hi, I wondered as well, I come from a family where one of my grandchildren hates the school meals and will not be participating in that. But I have concerns about where packed lunch children will be sitting and how they will be supervised and monitored that they're actually eating their dinner and they're not putting it in the bucket or taking it home, because quite often my granddaughter does bring her dinner home, and if she gets a lunch from the school lunch comes home in her school bag. So what monitoring is going on to make sure the bairn actually eats its dinner?
Thank you. You're taking us all back to our childhood when all sorts of things happened. Is it easy to respond to that, or should it be taken offline? Kevin Anderson.
We'll need to take that offline, Provost. Certainly there's a whole range of circumstances and indeed behaviours which need to be accommodated within our catering and dining arrangements. And I wouldn't want to get into the specifics of those, but that will certainly be part of our review in conjunction with head teachers after the October break.
Okay.
Thank you, because you know, bringing a school pizza home in your school bag makes a terrible mess.
Thank you for that. And all this talk of lunch is making me realise we need to have a break shortly, and then we can go on to the private papers. So if you can be brief, Councillor Hackett and then Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, I welcome the provision of free school meals. I think it's an excellent policy, and it's been called for by education professionals, the trade union movement, and many others. I just felt it important to highlight, though, that there is no such thing as a free meal. There is a cost involved in that, and it is imperative that the funding to support this programme does keep pace with the growth in Midlothian. If it doesn't, it means that the council will have to find those resources elsewhere. And given the tight margins that we've been operating as a council of late, that will mean a potential risk to other services, and they may well be others that support families. Again, referring back to the issues around poverty, etc. So my call to the Scottish Government, if you could please make sure that, as I say, you keep the funding at pace to what is required here in Midlothian. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. Just expanding this a little bit at the moment. This council in days bygone used to provide a service called Meals on Wheels, where meals were prepared for the elderly in their communities and distributed from the school kitchens. The food was prepared by the dinner people in these kitchens, and it worked very successfully. I know this because I used to help deliver these foods. Now, we're looking, I think Councillor Mackenzie mentioned it, let's get creative here. Perhaps we should be looking at doing something like this in our kitchens, where we are preparing mass amounts of food. We already have a procurement system where we bring food from, I think it's Wiltshire up to Perth, and it's bussed down to Midlothian or other councils. Surely this is an entrepreneurial chance for this council to start standing on its own feet in something like this and becoming businesslike, rather than looking at the Scottish Government every 5 minutes for a bit more money that we find hard to supply.
Thank you. A sort of buy local theme there, I think. Kevin Anderson.
Provost, thanks. I think we'll need to take that away in terms of the client group Councillor Cassidy was referencing for all the people at home. We'd want to consult with our Health and Social Care Partnership colleagues on what the arrangements were that withdrew that service in terms of any prospect of a reintroduction. I simply don't know, and we'll need to take advice on that.
Thank you. And Councillor Alexander coming in briefly, I hope. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, just on the back of what Councillor Cassidy said, I think that if we were able to supply a lot of the foods of origin locally, so we could be growing our own foods very locally, whether we get that from farmers or whether indeed we actually grow a lot of it ourselves, we could be feeding our old people, our young people, and those in need a lot cheaper, probably from a central kitchen, which is in Midlothian. And that would create jobs, it would create health benefits and so many other opportunities. I would just like to say as well that any good thing that the Scottish Government comes up with, it's always said, why doesn't the Scottish Government come up with the full funding for this? And I think the Scottish Government is doing a tremendous job on being innovative in its looking after its people. And I think that this should be celebrated. And it's doing so much more with the funding that it does get from Westminster than Westminster is doing in other parts of the UK. And I think that Westminster should actually be taking a leaf out of the Scottish Government's book and funding a lot of the initiatives that is being put forward.
Well, I think the Barnett formula certainly does that, with 20 billion coming to us, but perhaps that's a note on which we should wrap up and thank Kevin for his contribution on that. What I propose is that we will move into the private session, so this is a good time to break. And I suggest we come back at 1:15, that's 10 minutes time, to discuss the two private items. Thank you all for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Provost. And